Hi, I'm Nafisa Latic, and this is Across the Balkans. Today on the show, Aleksandar Vucic's landslide victory. Serbia's incumbent president secures a second term in office with almost 60% of the votes, and his center-right Serbian Progressive Party will maintain its control over parliament. During his campaign, Vucic promised peace and stability after Russia's attack on Ukraine sent shockwaves across Europe. But Belgrade's vague position came under pressure as the West forced it to choose a side. Either stick to its traditional ties with Moscow or move forward with its aspiration to join the EU. But Vucic was defiant, saying Serbia had no plans to change its neutral stance. The leading opposition candidate accused him of exploiting the conflict in Ukraine for electoral gain, saying these elections were the beginning of Vucic's end. Opposition and rights groups also accused Vucic and his allies of corruption, controlling the media, and attacking political opponents. Charges he has repeatedly denied. Let's take a closer look at the Serbian election results and what impact it could have on the region.
I verujem da su pred nama brojni izazovi, ali da je za Srbiju najvažnije da ima dobre odnose u regionu, da sa druge strane nastavi svoj evropski put, ali da istovremeno ne ruši svoje veze sa tradicionalnim prijateljima.
Echoing the same rhetoric as he did during a campaign he called the cleanest and most beautiful in Serbian history, Aleksandar Vucic celebrates his victory. With almost 60% of the vote, Vucic has now secured another 5 years in the presidential office.
To pokazuje da ću, zbog čega sam neobično ponosan, posle Nikole Pašića verovatno biti Srbin koji je najduže bio na vlasti u našoj zemlji.
For many citizens, Vucic's victory was expected, and for others, it was news they could do without.
Sam predsjednikov i ranije i sada, jer ovo što je on uradio, prethodni nisu uradili.
Strašno je živjeti pod presijom njegove vrste drame. On samo radi, katastrofa, sve je samo on, užas.
The election campaign was strongly influenced by the Russian assault on Ukraine. Belgrade supported 2 United Nations resolutions, but refused to participate in the sanctions against Russia. And despite pressure by Brussels, Vucic, the closest ally of Vladimir Putin in the Balkans, seems determined not to change course.
Nastavit ćemo sa tim i vodit ćemo politiku, ono što je važno i za Evropljane, i za Ruse, i za Amerikance, za sve to je da ćemo nastaviti politiku vojne neutralnosti, koja je dobila ogromnu podršku i nećemo se priključivati ni jednom vojnom savezu.
For the first time since 1999, neighboring Kosovo banned ethnic Serbs from voting on its own soil. Kosovo's Prime Minister Albin Kurti cited no prior agreement between his country and Serbia. With no polling stations opened, thousands of Kosovo Serbs, mostly near Mitrovica, crossed the border with their cars and on buses to vote in Serbia. After a decade on the political scene, Serbs are quite familiar with Aleksandar Vucic and his party. Starting as a nationalist, he transformed into a supporter of EU membership and backed military neutrality. And on Sunday, more than 2 million voters embraced his vision of a future Serbia and whatever twists it may yet have in store.
I have a great panel today with me to discuss the impact of Serbia's elections, both inside and out. In Belgrade, I'm joined by Vuk Vuksanovic. He's a senior researcher at the Belgrade Center for Security Policy. Before that, he worked at the Serbian Foreign Ministry. And in Sarajevo, we have political analyst Adnan Huskic. Great to have you both on the program, Adnan and Vuk. And Vuk, let me start with you. Aleksandar Vucic managed to get more than 2 million votes in these presidential elections. And he says this is something that no one else has done before in Serbia. What is the key to success of Aleksandar Vucic?
There are multiple factors. On one hand, he's beyond any doubt, he as a person, he's a very formidable individual who is obsessed with learning and self-improvement. I mean, sometimes this even receives a dimension of satire. But at the same time, it is also a problem that he has a political party and which completely dominates over the entire media scenery, all the state institutions, national security apparatus, public administration. So he is very effective in mobilizing all of these resources. And at the same time, I also think that what plays a part is the weakness of the opposition bloc, because he has very skillfully mastered the fact that for a large swaths of the Serbian population, there is a strong disappointment about some of the failures of the post-Milosevic and post-Milosevic economic and political transition, which occurred in between 2000 and 2012. So most of the opposition leaders and the opposition groups, from the standpoint of an average citizens, are perceived as a disappointment. So there is a large swath of the population which doesn't necessarily like Aleksandar Vucic, but they are not animated enough to vote for President Vucic. So
right, and how do you think the opposition performed in these elections?
I think that when it comes to the presidential elections, the outcome was pretty much expected. I think that even the second round presidential win for Aleksandar Vucic would have genuinely been a failure. At the same time, the parliamentary elections are, to be frank, a very, very big disappointment, unless in case of coalition Moramo have to, which is a new coalition of environmental and city politics movements in Belgrade. They are the only ones who can be pleased of passing the electoral threshold. While at the same time, we have votes which are being counted for the capital of Belgrade, where one vote might very well decide who will form a majority in the capital, which still has a lot of cultural, political prestige, and which also carries a lot of economic power because of the economic project which revolves around Belgrade. But to be frank, I think that if opposition fails to win election on each one of the levels of power in Serbia, I think that for many leaders of the current Serbian opposition, that can literally mean political retirement.
Adnan, what does 5 more years of Aleksandar Vucic mean for the region? It's interesting that one of the first things he said in his victory speech is that he's hoping to maintain good regional relations. Well, to be fair, Belgrade's relations with Zagreb and Sarajevo are far from good.
Well, I mean, if we look at the practical manifestation of it, and when we talk about Serbia and we talk about Croatia here in Bosnia, we are at the same time perfectly aware of the fact that both of these countries are not a foreign policy actor for us. That they both influence the political dynamics in the country, and that they are in a way, I would say, inherently connected to the political dynamics in Bosnia. Which makes them tremendously important. Now, of course, when we look at Vucic's time in the office for the past 5 years, and if we were to compare it with his predecessors, you can't tell very many differences between them in terms of the support, for instance, that the Vucic has been giving in a more structured way, I have to say, to Republika Srpska. There is a certain difference, but other than that, it is simply the Serbian foreign policy, which still appears to be torn between West and the East, but at the same time there are different subtle layers of not Vucic's persona, but the way he does politics, where you have him being the person that is the constructive member of the regional political landscape, while there are people around him who are acting as warmongers. So in this sense, I don't think that there's going to be any radical shift in the sense. The situation in the region is complex, and I think that it needs to be addressed on the regional level as well. But this is not so much the issue of who gets to govern in Serbia, we are obviously part of the row in the middle of relatively significant geopolitical changes over the past 15 years here in the region, and those elements, especially the waning influence of the West and the waning normative power of the European Union, are felt. So this is why and this is where I was actually hoping that Vucic might be the one to push forward for more constructive regional initiatives, despite all his shortcomings. But working to make a region truly more stable politically, which I don't think is or can be said for the previous 5 years of his time in the office.
Vuk, do you think there's going to be some shift in the way Vucic is going to behave when it comes to its neighbors? Can he be the key for constructive dialogue in the Balkans?
In a sense, he still remains something of a key player by virtue of being the leader of the most pivotal country in this small corner of the globe. So, but at the same time, I think that with Vucic, it always depends on the trade-off that he assesses. If he is perceived as being being the one who brings stability, then he will still continue to receive support from the West. But at the same time, there is always a danger with Aleksandar Vucic that he might play an old game of causing an artificial crisis, bring things to the brink, and then act as a savior just so that he can secure external support from the West. So with Aleksandar Vucic, it all depends on the trade-offs. If he is perceived as having no other way out except to act as a stabilizing force, he will do so. If he is perceived that he can receive some domestic benefit by acting as a quasi-nationalist, then he will act that way. So there are many faces of Aleksandar Vucic, and which face he shows to his neighbors and to the external world that depends on the moment and depends on his political calculation on that given day.
Adnan, looking at the future Serbian parliament, we have seen a rise in far-right parties. At least 2 far-right parties will enter Serbian parliament. Does this raise concern in Bosnia?
Well, I think it does, and it should, because now these parties, which were always confined to the fringes of politics, they were not invisible, far from it, but in terms of their visibility, this is a significant step forward for them. We are now going to be able to witness firsthand, I would say, probably very radical positions with regard to the region, with regard to Serbia's position in the region and neighboring countries where identity predominates, where we will see probably some reminiscence of the 1990s returning, and this would be one way of the manifestation of their new presence in the Serbian Assembly. On the other side, a lot of these parties are basically very closely connected to Vucic, sometimes acting even on his behalf. So if he sees fit for these parties to spew hateful rhetoric, they will do so. But I'm also under the impression that he can control them. He can really control them should he decide to do that.
Vuk, what put Aleksandar Vucic in the spotlight in international media as of recently is, of course, the Russian assault on Ukraine and his balancing act that he performed. Did the conflict in Ukraine help Vucic and his party to win the elections? And if so, how?
I think that, in a sense, Vucic profited electorally from this conflict, and he's not the only one who did so. I mean, his northern neighbor, Hungary, where Viktor Orban won the re-election, another leader with whom Vucic shares some traits. I mean, they both profited by changing the narrative and by portraying themselves as experienced leaders who can offer stability to their small, troubled country in a very dangerous time. I mean, even the slogan of Vucic's campaign, Peace, Stability, Vucic, testifies to this fact. So it helped him. Particularly since many thought that, inexperienced opposition, are they capable of coping with such a major European and international crisis? So they went so in minds of some perhaps random voters, they simply went for the devil they know rather than to go for uncertainty. But we have to also stress that the mathematics of the parliament will be very troublesome for Vucic.
So Vuk, let me jump in here. So who voted for Vucic? Those who were pro-Putin or pro-Western voters when it comes to the overall picture?
It is impossible to determine the exact numbers, but Vucic has his mathematics, and he's obsessed with public opinion polls, and he studies them diligently on a daily basis. So I think that he sees a society which is focused on the West in terms of consumerism, in terms of diaspora, in terms of geography, while at the same time he sees a society where, because of the political frustration with Kosovo, the pro-Russian sentiments are very high. So in a sense, the balancing act is frequently informed in case of Aleksandar Vucic with domestic dynamics in Serbia, where he tries to catch the votes of both pro-Russian and pro-Western voters at the same time.
Okay, now Adnan, we have two of Putin's closest allies in Europe winning new terms. Vuk was just mentioning one in Serbia and one in Hungary. Viktor Orban has won the elections on the same day, on Sunday. What does this mean for Europe and the region's future? Will they continue with their close ties with Moscow and Beijing? I mean, Putin was among the first leaders to congratulate both Vucic and Orban.
I think that the trajectory for especially Orban was set even earlier, and there is no reason to assume that he is going to make any significant shifts in terms of the way he does politics in Hungary. What we will probably see, and I hate myself for being so pessimistic about everything, but I think that we're going to see probably the European unity over Ukraine, the one that was displayed with the support of Hungary, probably breaking. We will see even more fractures in the European unity as we progress in the future, and he's going to play a significant part in it. Let me just remind you that recently the European Union adopted a new framework for sanctions, where at the request of Hungary it was changed, the decision-making mode was changed from qualified majority voting to unanimity, meaning that now to introduce sanctions you would need the acceptance of all 27 countries. And he himself was quite explicit in expressing his support not only for what we would call the troublemakers in the region here and in Bosnia, but very explicitly he's the one who said that he's not going to support any sanctions against Dodik in Bosnia. So I think that what we're going to see now with these elections is probably something that in a way helps or assists or creates an additional momentum for sovereignists and nationalists in the European Union, which is particularly interesting because we will have soon also French elections, which are going to be much more decisive for the future of the European Union than anything else we've seen so far.
Okay, and last question for both. Can we expect Vucic and Orban both to face deeper international isolation because of their closeness to Putin in the upcoming months?
I think that they will experience some heat, although I think that on a comparative note, Orban might receive more heat than Vucic, given that he is leading a country which is a member of both EU and NATO, and Vucic is not. However, I think that in the next 3 months, and Vucic will take all the constitutional time, the full constitutional time to form the new government in Belgrade, a lot of things can happen. Some new crises might emerge for which the EU might need Vucic's cooperation. Some crises in the Middle East can emerge which can divert Europe's attention away from Ukraine. So Vucic will bide for time and then check whether he can make new bargains with the Western capitals. And while Viktor Orban is a sign of potentially novel rifts in the EU, as my colleague from Sarajevo underlined.
Adnan, 30 seconds for you to close this discussion.
I think that especially those fractures that I mentioned earlier are not necessarily related to Hungary alone in the European Union. I think that the unity is dented, and this is obvious at this point with the discussion on furthering or deepening the sanctions against Russia. I also think that we live in a day and age where the attention span of the international public is very short, and I think that the Ukraine moments apparently has already gone. So I think that what we will see is much less pressure on those countries such as Hungary and Serbia in this sense because of disunity in the European Union itself.
Okay. Adnan Huskić, Vuk Vuksanović, thank you both for being my guest here on Across the Balkans. Ramadan is here, and Muslims around the world have started their month of spiritual reflection through fasting and prayer. Mosques have opened for the first time for Ramadan night prayers, ending 2 years of restrictive measures brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. Muslims started their fast on April the 2nd, which is determined by the sighting of the new moon, and will continue for 30 days. Ramadan is the holiest month of the Islamic year, when Muslims are expected to abstain from eating and drinking between dawn to dusk in an effort to exercise self-restraint and renew their spiritual focus. Bekim Laci went to Skopje to see how people in the Balkans are observing Ramadan.
This Ramadan, Muslims in North Macedonia have more reason to celebrate than one. The COVID-19 restrictions of the past 2 years are lifted, and traditions that were on hold can be practiced once again. The faithful are back at mosques. And stalls have returned, such as this one in Skopje's Ottoman Bazaar, which serves more than 100 meals every evening. Sofra Iftarit, or the Ramadan dinner table, began as a project to feed the poor during the holy month. But as the Ottoman Bazaar is a commercial and touristic area, anyone strolling by can also get to enjoy the local cuisine.
Organizatorët me njerëz privat dhe ato të cilët donojnë edhe e bëjmë për shtrimin e iftareve për skamnot. Po këtu është interesant një sens edhe rast nëse kalojnë turista apo ndojsen ka pas rast janë ullë, kanë hangër bukë, kanë hangër iftar edhe kanë dënuar ndoj pare, do të thonë kanë dhënë ndoj iftar.
At this time of the day, just before the sunset, streets become very busy with people rushing home to break their daily fast. Some of them are visiting friends or family, where they have been invited over for dinner. A very important Ramadan tradition that was on hold for 2 years as a result of COVID-19 crisis. The Suleymans pay special attention to this tradition. Reyhan and Haris have made sure the table is well set, especially since we are their first Ramadan guests in more than 2 years.
In the last couple of years, because of the pandemic and the curfew, we couldn't invite our relatives, we couldn't visit them, and we felt an emptiness in our houses because, again, it is a tradition together to be all together for iftar. We are glad that that period is over, and inshallah it won't repeat again.
Haris is also delighted too, once again, to share a meal with his parents.
It makes me really happy because last year my parents in this point, they couldn't come to visit because if they came, they couldn't leave afterwards because the curfew was starting before the iftar. And we were unable to make these collective iftars, to make the collective du'as.
Mosques in North Macedonia are packed again for nightly Ramadan prayer. An overnight curfew to fight the pandemic over the couple of years had kept mosques shut and people inside their homes.
Vetë shkuarja në xhami është një bukuri, vetë falja së bashku është një bukuri, lutja gjatë namazeve, gjatë namazit të taravih është një bukuri në vete. Domethënë këto janë karakteristika të Ramazanit që të gjithëve kanë munguar.
Namazi i taravih se plotson atë mozaikun e vetë muajit të Ramazanit dhe është një emocion vete.
The Imam of Skopje's Mustafa Pasha Mosque, Abdusamed Zechiri, says the Ramadan nightly prayer achieves a unity like no other.
Për arsye se safi na bën unik. Safi për neve është një mostër, një jërnek se si ne duhet të rrim edhe jashta xhamisë në saf, në mendimet tona, në veprimet tona, në aktivitetet tona, dhe kështu që këtë mundësi na jep vetëm se namazi kolektiv apo namazi me xhamat, apo saçërisht namazi i teravis.
While COVID-19 in North Macedonia is on the wane, it still isn't quite done yet. But it seems to have made Muslims here in Skopje reflect on what they have and appreciate what they cannot bear to lose. Bekim Laci, TRT World, Skopje, North Macedonia.
For those observing Ramadan, we wish you a blessed month. Thanks for watching this episode of Across the Balkans. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.